Healing from illness requires more than just managing symptoms. It demands a comprehensive approach that fosters lasting transformation and optimal well being. Today's guest is an integrative and functional medicine doctor who specializes in treating complex medical conditions. He's developed a unique approach to addressing chronic health conditions by recognizing that they require healing on multiple interconnected levels. This is the story of mast cell activation syndrome with Dr. Bruce Hoffman. Dr. Hoffman, great to have you on.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
We were discussing a little bit before we just got started here, and you had a lot of interesting, things to say. But I wanted to start with the approach. You have this 7-stage approach. You see so many different complex conditions, and that led you. So, can you just give us a little bit of that background of kind of what is your 7 stages to health and transformation model?
Yeah. At an early age, I was exposed to a lot of Eastern philosophy and religion, and ended up studying Ayurvedic medicine for many years with Deepak Chopra, and went to India and did a short internship there, and went to Bastia and did Ayurvedic medicine, and really resonated with their concept of the different sheaths that they say that humanity or human beings have different layers and levels to their experience, ranging from what they call the bliss sheath all the way down. They use different terms, but I ended up using a combination of the Vedantic texts, what I learned from Deepak Chopra, and what I learned from Dietrich Klinghardt in the early 2000s. We had a 5 levels of healing model, but I happened to change it and turn it into 7.
Seven works better.
Yeah.
7 is such a magical number in so many ways.
Yeah. And Dietrich gave me his blessing. I said, Dietrich, I think I'm going to add to your model because I feel that another layer and level, 2 other layers and levels had to be introduced. He said, fine, go ahead. So I added it, expanded it, and now I use that very practically in all of my approach to patients. And basically, it breaks down the human experience to the world outside of us, the level 1 or stage 1, which is the extended body of the environment, and how that interfaces with our level 2, stage 2, which is biochemistry and structure, in which we find traditional and functional medicine and all the manual therapies. Level 1 is all about toxicology and all the way the world interfaces with our level 2, which is biochemistry and structure. And level 3 is all about what we call the electromagnetic or the energy body. And that's very closely tied now to circadian biology, quantum biology, how the quantum field that's subatomic regulates the biochemical field, regulates the 2nd level. That's all the work of Jack Kruse and all the other people he studied, and Albert Popp and Gilbert Ling and etc. Many people have contributed to this understanding of the quantum domain regulating how mitochondria express energy and information. And then that also interfaces with the central nervous system, autonomic nervous system, which is electrochemically based, and how our stress response plays into how that gets modulated and mediated. And then level 4 is all to do with emotions. People have early childhood experiences, which creates a particular shift in the way the HPA axis modulates their stress responses. And that can be highly significant, as we know from the adverse children experiences, ACE studies, that people with early childhood developmental trauma can have 4 to 5 times increased incidence of chronic diseases as they age. And that's very much borne out in my experience. And then level 5 is the intellectual or ego-based body, our operational sense of self, who we think we are as we negotiate the first half of life, and with our drives and tendencies to want to feel safe and to feel seen and then to be established in the world. And we have our belief systems and our internal dialogue and our morals and our values and our cultural identifications. That's all in level 5, the intellectual body. And that also is, we have built into that defenses. We have sort of, ego defenses as enunciated by Freud. And then we have what we call soul defenses as enunciated by people like Calshed and others, where people defend against their interface with the world because of vulnerabilities or sensitivities or resistances to being more open, one could say, or having open traits in the world. And then level 6 is the soul. The soul is that part of you that's unconscious. So in the level 6, we move into personal unconscious, family unconscious, and the collective unconscious, which is the terrain of Carl Jung and others.
Mm-hmm.
And then level 7 is the bliss body, or the, one mind, in many names. In the physicist's world, it's the quantum domain that's beyond all space-time. It's the world of energy. It's where we're all the same, where we all, where we relinquish our attachment to our individual hubris and sense of ultimate importance, and against the backdrop of humanity and the infinite universe, we realize that probably we aren't as important as we think. So we surrender to something bigger than ourselves. Call it what you wish, grand organized designs, it doesn't matter. It's just something
Akashic records, all these different names.
something that transcends our own biography and our own sense of self. Yeah. So I use that model, and I use it very practically when I'm interfacing with people. I've learned over the years that if I interpose that with what I've sort of started to use most of the time, is Robert Naviaux's theory of mitochondrial cell danger response.
Mm-hmm.
He has a fabulous diagram where he says all disease is really one issue at the root cause, which is mitochondrial defense against the toxic load that we are inundated by. And the toxic load that we're inundated by is everything that we can experience from preconception to this present moment in time. So your toxic load then creates mitochondrial dysfunction, mitochondria having many, many functions, but the two most important are producing energy and relaying the photons to electrons in ATP production, but also defending ourselves against the toxic onslaught. And when it becomes too overwhelming and our defenses are too poor, we then go into what he calls this defensive mode, which is evolutionary and protective. And that then it creates this whole metabolic shift, and it tries to pull the individual out of life to preserve their life force so that they can survive the onslaught. So our task as functional medicine doctors, is identifying the toxic load, which can be across all layers and levels of the human experience.
Mm-hmm.
You can inherit your grandfather's trauma at Auschwitz,
Mm-hmm.
You can manifest that in your physiology accordingly. So you've got to take a very deep history. And then you've got to look into the biochemistry of the cell danger response. And then you've got to look into what Robert Naviaux called salutogenesis. Which signaling molecules do you need to put into the system to shift from this defensive mode back out into the health cycle? So when we work in a functional capacity, I use the 7-level model. I'll identify as many of the toxic stresses as we can across the layers and levels of the human experience. I then look at biochemical abnormalities across many dimensions: food, gut, hormones, cell membranes, mitochondria, et cetera, et cetera. What signaling molecules do you need to put back into the system? And then what the patient is responsible for is establishment of their so-called health cycle. How grounded and how reconnected are they to the cycles of day, night, sleep, grounding, good food, macro micronutrients, good social connections, et cetera, et cetera. They have to be responsible for practicing good health cycle principles. And so between their practices, between identification of toxicology and stresses, and then looking at what signaling molecules need to be used to turn that cell danger inflammatory response around into a healing response, becomes the whole subject of one's clinical interface with patients. Now, the interesting thing about mast cells, when the toxic load becomes excessive, it creates oxidative damage to the cell membranes. That then damages the DNA of mitochondria. And now we have the works of Doug Wallace and et cetera, who say that 95, probably 99% of all diseases have at their root mitochondrial dysfunction.
Mm-hmm.
So once the mitochondria are damaged, the DNA is damaged, the DNA of the mitochondria and the ATP become extracellular. And when they're extracellular, they trigger the degranulation of mast cells. And mast cells then release 1,000 mediators of inflammatory mediators across the board, which then further damages the mitochondria. And as you get more and more mitochondrially compromised, you get sicker and sicker as you go along. Some people have estimated you can have up to 70% of your mitochondria not as efficient as they should be, undergoing autophagy and apoptosis, and you can still function quite well. But once you reach a certain threshold and that whole cascade, that inflammatory cascade gets mediated, you then start to get this complexity of multi-system, multi-symptom disease. And that's what we treat and interface with in a clinic such as myself and many other clinics who do similar work. Yeah. I hope that
it's a very comprehensive take, and I appreciate that it goes beyond the conventional kind of route of a toxin is a chemical exposure of some sort that goes there, because we know toxins can be so much more. They're hidden. They could be EMF, they could be generational, they could be trauma, emotional, psychological. People have a very limited viewpoint of what a toxin is, if they even consider it. Some people say, what is detox? What is a toxin? We don't care. And just give you drugs to treat your condition, which is a toxin in itself.
And it's many drugs are mitochondrial toxins.
Right.
Even in functional medicine and integrative medicine, the very common mistake is people go and they say, I have mold illness, or I have Lyme disease, or I have heavy metal toxicity. And that's this very same mindset as we have in traditional medicine, which is silo-based. It's one thing causing one problem, causing one symptom. It's never like that. We always find 20 determinants of why the mitochondria are misbehaving. Well, they're not misbehaving. They're evolutionary defensive. They're actually doing exactly what they're meant to do. But why is the person so symptomatic? It's multiple stresses, multiple triggers, multiple toxins across a lifetime.
Yes.
That contributes. And so the task of an integrative physician is to try and identify instead of the 5-minute appointment, the 2-3 hour appointment, plus the lab work, as many of those determinants as you can. And that becomes the subject of an integrative interface between the patient and yourself. Yeah.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, a lot of medicine and a lot of patients are looking for the magic pill for the one thing that's wrong with them, right? It's one diagnosis and then it's one solution. And I agree, this happens sometimes in the integrative or functional alternative world, where it's, oh, you have this diagnosis, you need hyperbaric to, oxygen chamber, and that's it. And we're just going to put you in there over and over and over until you get better. And you usually don't. You might see improvement, just like you might see improvement taking a drug at first. But you never got to all the root causes because it was never a singular one, correct?
Never singular. And that's one of my greatest challenges is well-meaning patients with their exposure to naturopaths and other integrative physicians and Google, because they all
Dr. Google.
Most patients are very self-advocacy based, and they do amazing research, and they come in with a constellation of or a list of often just, I've got Lyme or mold, but then they've got a few other things. And then you've got to try and negotiate your way through that particular approach to try and flesh out the complexity that you can find when you do a long history and do many lab tests. I have a terrible reputation of doing too many lab tests, but I can tell you, I can't practice with doing a food sensitivity or a stool test showing you got gut permeability or a hormone saying your adrenal. Those days are gone. I can't practice like that. I refuse to, and I make no apologies for doing extensive testing, trying to look at the domain that is most helpful to get a patient turned around and back into the healing cycle. You need lots of labs. You can't just do a few things and think you've got it covered. You can't do that.
And you need some. No, and you need someone that truly can, read those labs too and understand them in their comprehensive nature. I just had a a person I know reach out to me and say, "Hey, I just got a lab back that shows lipoproteins are very high. What does it mean? Ask your father, ask everybody." And I go, I don't think that's really the full picture, but but her doctor wanted her to act on that one thing they found and do it. So again,
So
we
you
we
see that a
like to
lot.
reductionize everything to its minimal. This is your problem,
You
but
see that
you
a
know
lot.
this. It's not
One of the things I don't do is give out lab tests to patients before I see them, because what
smart.
they usually go and study on Google, and then the entire interview is well, it's not that I don't do it, but the entire interview then becomes me trying to calm them down that that slightly raised
Yes.
level is not your problem. You got to look at the trends, the sort of biochemical movement of what's going on to try and work out a hierarchy of their diagnostic and therapeutic needs. And
Yeah.
it's not one insulated biomarker, you know.
No, it's an artistic approach to
Uh,
assess things, but it's also the artistic approach of treatment and what kind of tools you have. And with something that is complex and that is
And what kind
often
of human being is in front of you, because
that too.
they have different defenses, they have different typologies, they have different Myers-Briggs, they have different attachment styles, they have different early childhood trauma. One of the more difficult or most difficult people to work with are those who have early trauma, who have
Mm,
never established a sense of limbic resonance and trust and ventral vagal security with anybody. And so they always, well, not always, but most often, are highly sensitized to not being seen and heard. And if you so much as mention something that's out of their belief systems, they can become very defensive, lose trust in you, and then you become merely another force that they project their early childhood wounds onto, and they don't trust you because you
yes.
interfere with their belief systems that they learned on Google. So it is the art of medicine. You have to know who's sitting, and you have to do your best. It's not a perfect art or science. It's an
No.
ongoing strategy, and sometimes you never can establish trust with somebody who's deeply wounded. Their defenses are they have so much rigidity and so much riding on protecting the last vestige of innocence that's beneath all that trauma, that they won't allow any other belief to sort of get between them and their sort of that part they're protecting. So sometimes you fail. I mean, you do your best, but
Yes.
sometimes you fail. And then you got to
No.
bear the brunt of the projection.
No, and oftentimes that failure isn't because you didn't have the solutions or knowledge. It's because the patient or the person in front of you wouldn't allow that. Sometimes people are stuck within their diagnoses. Sometimes they are stuck in victimhood mentality. Is that not part of it? Of course, you try and break them out of it. That's the best, but there's only so much a doctor or any person trying to help can do.
Absolutely. And one tries not to be reactive to the projection. You try and work with it, but sometimes it's very difficult. Sometimes you can't break through that. And no matter how you try and establish empathic understanding, insight, override it with salience and knowledge, or say that, that insight you have, I understand why it's there, but you may need to reframe it in this possible way and work with a somatic experiencing practitioner to try and downregulate your amygdala hyperactivity and fear of that particular thing. And you fail sometimes, and it's one of the great, one doesn't know how to negotiate through all of this. But thankfully, most of the time we are able to enter into a person's psyche with enough sensitivity most of the time to not trigger that defense that just says, I don't trust you either, like I didn't trust my mother or my father. And I
Right.
don't trust 100 otother doctors I've seen who said the same thing,
Right. Well,
You
that's
get
the
only
thing.
that.
Oftentimes, by the time they end up with and the openness to see someone such as yourself or someone outside of the conventional realm that they were told would help them, they've already been through the gambit of hopelessness and being told something and it not working. And so then you have to unravel all of that too. There's a lack of trust with
Lack
all
of
doctors, let's say, then.
medical PTSD is the word that's used, and it's
Yes.
rampant. And I don't blame people. I mean, the amount of nonsense that gets thrown around in terms of diagnosis and treatment,
Right.
is quite extraordinary sometimes.
Well, no lack of understanding certain things. I want to talk about MCAS, mast cell activation syndrome, but also Lyme, mold, all these things that most people, when they start having their symptoms, which are very unique to them, when go to the conventional doctor, and I've seen this many times, they get the very scary MS, they get the very scary, something else diagnosis, or, and suddenly it's a big deal we have to address. Whereas they move on to the functional practitioner, oh no, 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 that was MCA, that was Lyme disease, and let's treat it in a comprehensive nature. But isn't that part of the problem that there isn't much knowledge about these things within the conventional world?
Certainly, there's no understanding of complexity of multi-system, multi-symptom disease that mast cell presents. Robert Naveau cell danger is because the silo-based gives, you dermatology, cardiology, respiratory, you
Right.
got all these diseases, nobody talks to each other. And they're all not wrong, but they're just not seeing that the root underneath it all is this defensive inflammatory mode that's got mast cells sitting in the middle of it.
Mm,
They can't tie the pieces together, and the patient just goes from pillar to post, beating their head against the wall, knowing that they're ill, but getting nowhere because they get. So I had a patient I'm working with now is, had psychiatric admission, 3 psychiatric
mm,
admissions. And she's educated and well informed, and she's not a psychiatric patient.
mm.
She's has, neuropsychiatric manifestations of chronic ill health, but she's not traditionally psychiatric per se.
If someone is listening to this, going through the gambit of what this can be and not understanding, being told all these different diagnoses that just don't seem even right to them, what is one to look out for with something like mast cell activation syndrome?
Well, mast cell activation syndrome, the mast cells, which are white cells that protect you against further invasion, but when they sense danger, they release these 1,000 mediators of inflammation. Or defense, ranging from histamine to proteases to chemokines to leukotrienes. So they sort of splatter like a shotgun, all these in multi-systems and multi-symptoms. And so it behooves a patient to try and look at, say, Dr. Afrin's book, Never Bet Against OCAM, or
Mm,
get a paper on. I've written blogs and things on what mast cell, how mast cells can present. And when they start seeing, oh, from a young age, I had irritable bowel syndrome, and then I had skin allergies, and then I had runny nose, and then I had, fibromyalgia, and then I had chronic migraines, and then I had endometriosis. And they see all of these symptoms that, over years have sort of been there. And then they get one trigger that then, like mold exposure, and they just get blasted into this multi-symptom plethora of symptoms, going from tinnitus to insomnia to migraines to shortness of breath to POTS and tachycardia and diarrhea, irritable bowel syndrome and joint pain and eczema. Once they start seeing multi-system, multi-symptoms across the board, they have to find themselves a mast cell specialist who can sort of put it all together and say, look, you have this chronic inflammatory condition. It's multi-system, multi-symptom, and you need to work your way through a step-like approach to managing it. And there is a hierarchy and a step-like approach to managing it. I use my own method over the years, which is establishing the health cycle principles, and then getting people to regulate their autonomic nervous system and the amygdala through either neurobiofeedback principles or SE practitioners, or many using some of the more DNRS programs, the primal trust programs, the Gupta programs, just self-regulating, cooling off their autonomic nervous system. And then I work with treating the circadian biology piece. They must learn about getting up with the sun and going to bed in darkness and getting rid of non-native EMFs and grounding. Then we work with diet and micronutrients. And then we work with POTS. You got to treat POTS before you go anywhere beyond anywhere else. If you don't treat POTS, you're not going to get a person out of it. And then you got to stabilize mast cells. And then you start stabilizing cell membranes and mitochondria. And then you do all the rest. I don't go near Lyme disease. I don't go near binders until we've established these hierarchy of symptoms and treatments based on this approach,
Yeah.
You go throw binders at somebody with mold exposure when they've got fatty acids that are low on the fatty acid test, -70, -80 of total lipid content, that person's going to crash their mitochondria because the cell membrane becomes further compromised. The binders bind fats that
Mm-hmm.
make up the cell membrane. So
Yeah.
there's a hierarchy of interventions that are necessary.
And that's the thing, especially when you're talking about any complex chronic condition, it's the prioritization also of addressing certain things. People
Absolutely.
think, oh, I'll just, address the pathogen and that'll be enough. So we'll just go after that. But that's not usually, most of the time, the best case scenario. And everyone's different. How they have to peel back the layers of the onion will be different. So treatment protocols really make no sense in these type of things, correct? You got patterns, but not the particles.
There's no there's no protocol that you can give. You have to know, you yourself have to know who you are to some extent because you're going to be triggered by their response. You have to know who the patient is, and then you have to adjust your protocol to some extent according to their particular presentation. Some people, you may send them to do family constellation work before you go near the pathogen because
Hmm.
they're so dysregulated, and the charge that the unloved parent plays in their psyche is so huge. Unless they work through that, there's going to be no opening to get any other therapies to work. Won't work.
Yeah.
So you got to know the patient, you got to know their defenses, you got to know their particular. You also got to know what they're asking you to help them with. You have to be very sensitive to that. What is it? What is it you want me to do? How do you want me to help you? And if they give you a broad mandate, then you have to present the broad mandate. Sometimes they have a narrow mandate. I had one guy come to see me, just want to know if my dizziness and my ringing in my ears is due to mold. Okay, we can do that. We'll do this. But he didn't want to know anything else. Fine. That's the mandate he gave me. We'll do that.
Yeah. You mentioned, family constellation therapy and work there, Hellinger's work with that. We've seen wonderful things when patients go through that, but it's
Huge.
often very, very misunderstood. And if you're looking at it from an objective point of what type of, medical procedure is this, because it's not a medical procedure, of course, they dismiss it many times as well. This isn't
Huge.
helpful. What is the drug? Yeah, talk a little bit about why it's so important that type of work.
Well, human beings who sit in front of you, they are half their mother and half their father. So
Hmm.
50% of them comes from mother lineage, and more importantly, the mitochondria come from mother, 50% from father. And whatever the father or mother could download into the child becomes the grist for the mill and becomes the narrative and story that child then carries throughout their life. And sometimes the child didn't get much from mother or father. And then they judge mother or father accordingly, and they have a block to the energetic transfer of order in the system that comes from the parents. And then sometimes that parent didn't get much from their parents. So you have this whole lineage of, mothers and fathers who weren't seen, weren't heard, and got very little from the parental influence. And the whole system gets entangled into this resentment and judgment. And I hate my father, I hate my mother, I don't speak to my brother. That system is blocked. There's no way that the life force can come through that system. And unless you have a methodology of unblocking it and showing them insight, you're not going to get, because, Dietrich was great with this. He's, the upper levels trickle down to the lower levels, but you can't treat the mold and then fix your family system. So once you start seeing how the person can release their life force and accept the parental influences and say yes to mother or father, you can't really access the whole energetics of your inherited ancestral life force, which is vital to vitality and resilience and ability to negotiate the slings and arrows of life, and your illness.
Right.
You need to tap into mother and father's energy. You know, they stand behind you and say yes. I watched Hellinger work once in Washington by surprise. I didn't even know who he was. I went into a hotel room and he had 300 people there. It was at a conference. I just happened to stumble. And there was a woman with breast cancer, and she sat down and he looked at her and she started laughing and he told her to go sit down. He said, I'm not going to work with you. And she had stage 4 breast cancer. And he just said to this woman, because he found out later that she hated her mother and hated her father. And he said, unless you can say yes to your mother and father, I'm not working with you. You don't take this work seriously. Now, people will get all up, they get, well, my father did this to me and my mother didn't do this. And my mother was a narcissist and an alcoholic. Okay. Family constellation practitioners work through those dynamics and show an individual how that system, in spite of it being tiny and only the patient getting a thin thread, that still led to you got life from your mother. You exist because of your transmission of sperm and ova. If unless you say yes and be grateful for life itself, I cannot help you.
Hmm.
And that
Incredibly
can
powerful,
unlock,
right?
it can unlock the floodgates. People heal when they get that kind of insight.
And let me ask you, what percentage of patients require possibly not even, family constellation, but emotional or traumatic type, resolution therapies?
In my experience, the majority of complex illness require family systems insight and amygdala retraining and
Hmm.
somatic experiencing, even psychedelic therapies to bypass some of the default mode network and the narrow. One of the things you don't heal in the same environment you got sick at, you don't heal with the same mental field that you originated your illness, and you definitely don't heal with the same story that you're telling your narrative, your internal dialogue with the 60,000 thoughts a day. You don't heal with the same narrative unless you have a sort of some breakthrough experience. That's why psychedelics have become so sort of revolutionary, because people, they can break through their insights and bypass their internal dialogue by having a transcendental experience through psychedelics. But you
Are
can do
you
it.
are you a fan of
What's
psychedelics?
that?
Are
Was
you a
it?
fan of psychedelics and
Uh,
use of
well,
MDMA and others? Yeah.
anything that helps a person develop a new narrative, a new mental field, a new
Yeah.
insight, which then releases energy for lower for mitochondrial energy transfer. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Why say no to anything that helps? I have patients who only want natural treatments for myself. They don't want drugs. Why don't you want drugs? Because I think they are unnatural. Well, I can tell you now, mast cell blockers work 10 times more than quercetin does. Okay, you don't want to do levocetirizine? Do quercetin. Might take a bit longer or not. Sometimes people with that belief, they do well with quercetin. You've got to work with all layers, all levels, all beliefs, and do your best to bring your certainty to the equation without hubris or arrogance. I'm the doctor, do what I say or get out of my office.
Well, that's the thing. It's a relationship. It's not. I think too many people see their doctor as this savior or is going to do the healing for them, right?
The
Especially as we
hero
know,
archetype. Yeah, we occupy the hero archetype. I'm all
right?
knowing, you're all ignorant, do what I say, or that's a one-sided nonsense relationship.
And again, but that's what most of conventional medicine is, right? You have a few minutes, they write up on a piece of paper and say, do this and do that, and don't worry about this or your lifestyle, and keep seeing me year after year as you get worse.
And at times that is an appropriate intervention. I recently had open heart surgery because of an aneurysm, and my surgeon, I don't want him to know about integrative healing and levels of that. Just fix my valve. Thank you. I'm quite happy with that.
It's necessary still, right? People
Oh
think
yeah,
I'm against it. My father started off conventionally based
no
and was
problem
doing
with
those
it.
surgeries and anesthesia on people, so I know it's still necessary.
Please keep doing it. I'm very grateful that you saved my life. Yeah, I don't want you to know about shamans and psychedelics. Just operate on my heart valve. Thanks. I'm very grateful.
There's a place and time for all different facets of what is already out there in medicine, correct? It's just when
Absolutely.
you look at it from the complexity of most chronic diseases that are around today, conventional medicine does not have the best solutions. As you said, the surgery will not help for those things that require emotional work.
Absolutely. And the other, some patients also come and say, um, well, won't you educate my specialist or my GP on the work that you're doing with me? I say, absolutely not. That's not no. They are
Yeah,
good at what they do within that. You must learn when to take this complaint to them. Don't try and get them to cross over. That they're good at that. Use them for that. And don't try and convince them of integrative principles and 7 levels of healing. It's
right.
just a waste of time. They don't want to know about it. They just do what they do, and they do it well and say yes to that, you know.
Right. Instead of trying to teach someone to learn a different language, let's appreciate there are many languages we won't know each other, but we can still all get along on this world with so many languages.
Absolutely. The new book I'm writing on the new curriculum for healers is not, I'm not intending it to change the medical paradigm. I'm intending it to stand alongside and just be respected. And once you've got the evidence base for it and you have the case histories, you can't refute it, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
How's that book come along? I know you said
It's
you were writing it and
damn
getting back to it.
slow. It's too slow for my liking. Because as
And
soon as I get
is that the principle of it, Dr. Harvey? Is it to just show that there is a blueprint out there, but it coincides with what is already happening in the medical world?
Yeah, it's just, you know, I mean, I have I've run into my medical boards because of what I do. And it's everybody who's got any anybody who's doing any good work is going to run into the traditional
Of
system.
course.
And I happen to get access to their internal dialogue communicating with each other. They actually published it. And the comment of the lead investigator trying to get me for what I do says, I believe that all of this functional medicine or CAM medicine is snake oil salesmen.
Wow.
This is the medical board statement. It's like, really? Uh, okay, go to the 150 reviews by medical doctors and patients as to how integrative medicine saved their life when the traditional system had nothing. So, you know, that those people who believe, you know, integrative medicine is snake oil salesmen, I have no interest in trying to change their point of view. They're going to
Yeah,
die with that point of view. You can't
they
change it.
will.
So you can't make, very seldom can you change a Muslim into a Christian. It doesn't happen that often, you know.
Right. Those beliefs are very, very ingrained, right? And again, that's a belief usually by age of 7 that is established. It's listen
Right.
to your doctor. This is the right way. The other way is wrong. And even if you think you're an open-minded person, you just can't break through that belief system.
Can't get through that belief system. I mean, you know, with, you know, traditional medicine and the belief in drugs as the sole savior of humanity is a cult.
Yes.
It's a cult. It's a belief system that's completely rigidified into the so-called science of medicine. And all the great people who've gone through that have all come up against those belief systems that are just impenetrable, and they just give up in the end. But they break through and they develop a new paradigm, like Buckminster Fuller says.
Hmm.
You don't evolve by changing the old. You just break it down. And we need a new medical curriculum. So
We do,
I'm
but you know,
I'm
it
trying to
brings
write.
up it brings up a good question is that you still have a majority within the cults. Like that's just the foundation. But you also have a majority that's sick, possibly because they're in the cults. How do we then turn around society to be healthy if so many are in the cults?
Well, I think we're always going to have a 50-50 between those who are sick and those who are healthy, and they're all gradations on the same, on a different scale. So, you know, I don't know. I mean, part of the subtext for my book is from illness to illumination. How do we, you know, healing can be multi-leveled. You know, you know, treat symptoms and get rid of symptoms and get rid of diseases with drugs. We can then do mind-body medicine and modulate our immune systems and modulate our responses. We can then try and transcend that and take responsibility and do it on our own. Or then we can really shift consciousness, as Ken Wilber would say in his integral theory of everything, and realize that at the deepest level of our reality, we are not our bodies, we're not our emotions, we're not our thoughts. We are pure consciousness, which is level 7, and we can die fully healed. Our body may die, but we have an awareness that we aren't this constricted, ego squeezed into the body over the space of a lifetime. We're more expansive than that, but that's a different state of consciousness. So
Yes.
there's different levels and layers of healing. And where are you going to play in the game of life? It depends on your desire, and depends on your insights, and it depends on your evolution. You know.
It, is that what you see for the future, possibly, or at least the good side of things is the evolving and hiring of consciousness that allows us to break free of the cult and embrace things that keep us in healthy states?
If you look at spiral dynamics and the evolution of cultural consciousness, it's always gone in layers and levels, and they call them memes,
Mm,
red meme, orange meme, blue meme, turquoise meme. Ken Wilber was a great integral theory of everything. He looked at these memes. And the whole postmodern meme was everything's equal, there's no hierarchy. And we got into this whole woke agenda based on this turquoise meme of everything's equal. There's no discrimination between anything, and everybody has a voice and a chance to. And we've sort of overshot that and gone to pathology with it. So we're going to bring ourselves back to more sort of holistic or holonic thinking. And I don't think we can evolve. Society does move in memes of consciousness. Yes, there's been an evolution of consciousness. We're always moving towards some strange attractor, but it's always 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. And I
right.
think we've gone through a terrible reset lately.
So it seems,
On
right?
the world stage. So I don't have much faith. And consciousness, post evolutionary consciousness, or a consciousness that's sort of more evolved, is always in the hands of the very few. It always has been, always will be. You know,
Right. It's
1 to 4% of the population is at the cutting edge of consciousness. I don't think the masses are going to move into, postmodern memes that can be sustained.
Yeah, and it seems the evolution is almost like this alchemical, as they describe a circle going upwards, but it always comes back down on its upwards trajectory. So while we go up, there are down parts to it as well as the evolution continues.
Yeah.
So, where we find ourselves, whether it's the downward spiral of it all, hopefully we could find the upswing into the, back higher consciousness of
I think
everything.
we're in a regressive movement at the moment.
We're in retrograde. We're
We've
in Mercury
retro,
retrograde right now.
as they like to say.
Yeah.
We're in a bit
All
of a reset.
retrogrades are necessary as well, right? It's reflection, or chaos comes peace, and it's you need the law of polarity to everything. And still,
Existence.
it's you have to admit, I always say this, it's a wonderful time where we could speak to each other from thousands of miles away and connect like this, and not have to worry about many things you had to not only 100 years ago. So you still always got to look at the positives, even though there are so many negatives out there.
Yeah, at least we don't die of infectious illness as much as we
That's
used to.
right. A
And our
paper cut
water,
is not a death warrant.
exactly.
Let me ask you this, because I see this. You started surfing at 13. Every single person I know that's ever surfed has such a good perspective on health, nature. There is not a single surfer I met that doesn't have a deeper understanding of nature. Why is that? I need to know.
Well, Jack Cruz did a podcast, and I actually have it on my podcast list of things to listen to. Why surfing is the most healthy sport known to man. And
Yeah.
I surf in cold water, the Atlantic, which is 14 degrees, 13 degrees. That's cold thermogenesis for you.
Yeah.
And then you get the sun, which is light.
Yeah.
And then you get the ions, and then you're grounding. There's something
Yes.
about, and you get the movement. I mean, I have the most beautiful memories of, before I'd go to South Africa for holidays, and I would surf till the last moment, watching the sunset. And then I'd run home, take my surfboard, shower, get on the airplane, and fly back to the interior of Canada, knowing, and I would be filled with the joy of, when you tuned in and you grounded and you rewound into the threads of nature and life. There's something vital that just makes you sing. There's something about that. When you're inside under white light with rubber-soled shoes and blue light from your screen, and you got 8-hour days, and everybody. That's not how, why are we sick? We've unthreaded ourselves from the fabric of nature, and surfing is an epitome of being wound back into the fabric of nature. And that's why I believe surfing is so.
I agree with you. I even heard the rhythmic ups and downs as you wait for a wave is you
Oh,
understand day night cycle. You understand cycles way better as you go up and down, waiting on that wave, and you
and you look
contemplate life.
and you're looking down for the fin of the great white.
And that too. You contemplate life, understand risk, and still do it. That is healthy.
Where my home surf spot, there's is the passage where great whites go between Shark Island and the south. So
I've
they
been there, I
pass
know.
about
Cape
1
Town.
kilometer in front of me. You're always looking, and then you have
Always.
beautiful wave and the sun and the wind, and yeah.
Well, it sounds amazing. I could understand why, and yeah, it's a beautiful thing. Dr. Hoffman, this has been really a wonderful conversation. I appreciate so much. Tell me, where can people learn more about you, work with you? How do they connect?
Well, we didn't speak much about muscles.
It's all right. I feel like we got through it enough that,
I got lots of blogs on my cells on my website, so they can go there for more detailed assessment. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, my website is hoffmancenter.com. I don't even know my Instagram handle, but I do have an Instagram.
We'll share it. We'll
Yeah.
share it. I'm following you. I'll share it as well on there, and we'll make sure people can connect and figure out if they happen to have mast cell, what they can
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, my cell, and we'll be publishing soon about the mitochondria and the cell danger response and quantum biology in more detail. So look out for that. And the book, hopefully the book's going to be out by the end of the year, if not early next year. And I'll be
Amazing.
taking courses. I'm going to move more into an education role than just a one-on-one and having a big clinic.
I think most doctors at a certain point want to do that, pass down the legacy in education. I know my father, Dr. Rao, Dr. Klingharkor, others are doing that. So I commend you, because we got to train the younger generation how to carry this on, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, carrying a big clinic with a responsibility as you age, it becomes more difficult. Not because it's just, you know that in your own, it's time for your soul to move into another way of expression. And
Yes.
you've done that for 20, 30 years. Now you've got to use the transformative aspects of evolution within your own soul to move into a higher creativity phase of your life, which is teaching more than just single people.
Well, beautifully said. That's a great note to leave it on. Thank you so much for joining. I hope
Nice
we can
chatting
do
to
this
you.
again soon.
Okay.
And for those listening, be sure to visit Hoffman Center. That's HOFFMANCENTRE. That is the
Ari.
Canadian way. Yes, not the other, not us Americans, ER. For more information, and I do have your Instagram here. It's at Dr. Bruce Hoffman. That's it. Simple, easy. So head over there to connect with them. Until next time, continue writing your own healing story.